Before you come in typing your comments, let's have a chat about this movie because I have a lot of thoughts, so bear with me. But first of all, if you don't know who I am, hi, my name is Deborah, student singer, songwriter, and everything else between. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about my favorite TV shows, movies, and books. And today we're talking about Kinds of Kindness and the literal shock that I'm still in after watching it last night. So recently I went to go see Kinds of Kindness in theaters yesterday, and I'm still reeling off of what the fuck I just watched. So first of all, I personally feel that Kinds of Kindness is not or doesn't really fall under a comedy. To me, it didn't really make me laugh that much. Don't get me wrong, there were some moments that were comedic and I will explain later, but as a comedy, like as a whole, I don't think this film really fits that category. For me, it feels more like a thriller because of all the shocks and all the craziness. This was branded as a dark comedy, and to me personally, there were some scenes in this film that really cannot make me laugh no matter how dark they are, but I will explain that later in this video. First of all, let's talk about the things I did like about this film. I thought the cinematography was amazing. The videography, the cinematography, beautiful. So I know that Yorgos, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, is behind this film and also was behind Poor Things, and you can see his influence definitely within this film. I mean, it's also very interesting because I think a lot of the homes that were used, especially the inner decorations of the homes, were similar to that were of the homes that were used in Poor Things. Love and fixation on big mansions and on big white doors. You can see his style of cinematography. He loves having a subject within like maybe a field and then panning out. There's many scenes like that. So the sound design was amazing. There were moments where in the first part, Robert's wife is squeezing juice. You can hear the sound that it makes you feel that something is very uncomfortable and something feels very raw here and you're not sure what it is. And it's just, it makes you uncomfortable, which is the point, which is the goal. I think the colors of the movie were really rich. For past memories, they would switch to black and white rather than in color. And I noticed how this is used versus in Poor Things, for example, where in Poor Things, black and white was used to signify a certain time period. So maybe, and then as she's growing older, things turn into color. Versus here, black and white is used for mostly memories so that you can know the time differentiation. And I thought that was so smart. I thought that was so well done. I thought that was genius. I thought the whole look of the film was very beautiful. Now, I know some people are going to come in my comments and they're going to be like, this isn't supposed to be compared to Poor Things. Poor Things is a different project. And in my personal opinion, this is a different project. However, if you're going to use the exact same like characters from a previous film, similar sets, similar sound design, and not expect any comparison of it, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. I personally think that if you're going to repeat similar characters and not to mention have them play similar roles, then you definitely should expect some sort of comparison or another when it comes to this film, because there seems to be a fascination with Emma Stone with Yorgos' vision, and I do love that, but that is bound to garner some sort of comparison, and that's only fairly normal if you're going to continue using similar people in these projects, right? So that's that for that. Like I said, this was marketed as a dark comedy, and I really don't feel like this falls into the comedy category because there were some moments that were comedic, but this whole film did not feel like a comedy. It felt like a series of events and short stories that were absurd and crazy, and I don't think that should fall under comedy. I think that should just be a thriller or another category of its own. There were a lot of things. There were some scenes that were like comedic to me, especially in the second like story where I think it's Daniel that is a police officer, and he's talking to his fellow colleagues, and his colleagues were actually gave some good one-liners. There were some comedic moments, and there's some comedic moments that I do remember, but overall as a film, for the whole 2-hour 30-minute body of work that it is, it doesn't feel like a comedy. The scenes of sexual assault, which I'll touch on a little bit later, and it's just not funny to me. It was actually really traumatizing, and I really feel like this film could have taken these absurd moments and created something that was worth looking at or thinking about, rather than trying to brand it as a comedy and trying to use that as a cover for how outlandish and absurd it is. You guys know on my channel I like to give positive criticism with negative criticism, and I personally think that if this film was to be more funny, I think this film had a lot of potential. Besides the sexual assault scene, I really feel like the ways this could have been funny and the most comedic moments to me were actually in the first third part of this film with Robert and Raymond. I thought there was so much absurdity. I thought this was a great direction, even though it lagged a little bit at the beginning and I was trying to understand what was going on. I really felt like that part had the most potential because it was so outlandish and so stupid, but also so creative at the same time. And that's what I mean, that I don't completely hate this film. I just feel like it really wasted its own potential. For example, between the conversations and dialogue between Raymond and Robert, dialogue was quite smart in the sense of, you know, that there's underlying themes with how the characters talk to one another. So for example, when Raymond is telling Robert how to work his daily life, you can read in between the lines. You can read that Raymond is the boss, he is the dominant one in this relationship or this arrangement or whatever it is, and Robert is the subservient one. He's practically, you know, continuing this master slave situation. There's some moments when Raymond and him have a sort of pseudo-sexual moment as well that sometimes garners on comedic, not to mention when Raymond stands up and in front of Robert like this, he's actually shorter than Robert and he wears these ridiculous pants. And I thought to myself, that is so smart. That is actually a comedic moment. But this is not continued throughout the film. There's only small moments where you notice this sort of comedic intent, but then outside of that, it becomes a thriller once again with so much absurdity, shock value, murder, and cannibalism. And I personally think in those scenes, those were really the like highlight of comedic moments. And I really felt that they should have built up upon that, and this could have been a comedic masterpiece, a true dark comedy masterpiece. But instead, it leans into other themes that are so absurd that kind of ruined the premise that the first third of the film has created. Which led me to my second point. My question was, what was the point of this film? It's literally one of my notes that I have here on my laptop while I was watching. The whole time I was just thinking, but what was the point? And now I know not every single film has to have a point to it. Some movies are just avant-garde. Some movies are just there for artistic purposes. And I feel like this is a movie that they wanted to just be there for the shock value. And if that is the case, that's fine. But then don't brand it as something that is a comedy and make us more attached to the characters. Have us attached to the characters in a specific way, because half of the time I wasn't really attached to the characters. It felt like they were building up all these people and then they just sort of left it there, gave us a little bit of shock value, and then moved on to the second act, which really doesn't really make sense in the grand scheme of things. If you're going to build up Robert into somebody who eventually gives up into Raymond's wants and needs because of his paranoia and how much he just cannot make decisions for himself, and he's eventually going to run somebody over, which in itself is a crazy thing to do, give us a little bit more understanding of why this happened in the first place. Who does Raymond think he is to be able to do this to other people? Who does Raymond think he is to be able to just have somebody and throw somebody out and have somebody else do his will, like with Rita, Emma Stone's character? Why is Raymond doing this? What has happened in his life that can make us understand that this guy is a true weirdo and he's a sicko? Give us more context so we can actually sort of relate to these characters in a specific way, because there was no way I could relate to any of these characters without any sort of background or context. And I feel like that's the one thing that's really missing in this film is context. And some people say that there's no context needed, that this was just a film for being a film, but I'm so sorry. I personally don't agree with that. You should, for your audience that you're going to show this film, should give some personal context, because who the fuck is RMF? Who is RMF and why should I care about RMF? It never gets really explained who RMF is, and we're just supposed to guess that RMF is just like this figure, but why is he here? That's not really making the movie deep. That's just giving us general context. It feels like RMF is really the victim in a lot of these situations, so make us attached to that. Then this could be more funny when he gets so rolled over, because RMF is just the guy, but we don't know who this guy is. We don't know why he's being targeted. We don't know why he's being killed almost every time, or why in the final scene he eats a sandwich. Why is this happening to RMF? And I feel like it's these simple things that the movie is missing in favor of being edgy or avant-garde, that it really doesn't touch on the cornerstones of these simple things that we as an audience need to be able to find a film funny or find a film even as a dark comedy. So another point that I wanted to touch on is the shock value and hypersexuality. So I've noticed that in Yogurt's films, especially with Poor Things, and this was a discussion that was had on the internet, that the hypersexuality of that film was not really necessary. For me personally, I understood the first few sex scenes with that film, but then after a while I did get physically tired, or like I got like emotionally tired of watching so much sex happen, and I understood why it was happening, to show you like just how rigorous being a prostitute at that time was and the realities of it. But at least it kind of made sense in this film. There's some bits of that do make sense, like for example with Omi and Aka and the fact that they're in a sex cult, right? And I think in that moment there's no sex actually shown between both of these characters, but you could can overhear what's happening from the door, and you can hear what the characters are saying, and you know that these characters are sexually involved with one another, and it makes sense in the context. So you already know that there's this weird sexual relationship, and I felt like that was really well done for that part. But for example, a part that didn't really make sense was in the second act when Liz's character, who was stuck on an island and then she's found again. First of all, there's the whole orgy scene that like shocks you, and I remember being in the cinema and everyone was just there like, I remember when leaving the cinema and everyone was talking about the film and everyone was like, that orgy scene was not needed at all. And I personally agree. I personally think like that added nothing to the story. That added absolutely nothing, because the couple that they even had the orgy with didn't even show up towards the later half of that second part. So what was the point of that? The point of that was shock value for the sake of shock value. You just wanted to add a sex scene and that's it. And it added nothing to the story. And I really feel like those scenes were really not necessary. Not to say that I'm against sex in films. It's just like, it just felt unnecessary. And I understand shock value, but have shock value make sense in the sense of your film, so that you can appreciate it in its whole entire form as a body of work. But having the random sex scene just kind of felt out of place and was just kind of like, okay, like I really didn't need to see that. Like, I didn't need to see everyone naked. Do you know what I mean? Because what happens, Daniel might be hallucinating when he finds the doppelganger or the original version of Liz, and we don't even know what is real and what isn't. But what did the orgy have to do with that? And not to mention on the beach when supposedly this woman, or whether she's the doppelganger or not, has been stuck on this beach, and all she could do was think about him sexually. Mind you, later in this same exact film, she talks about how she saw a dream where dogs were humans and humans were dogs, and how the dogs had them chained, and then how they forced them to eat chocolate because those are the only things that dogs couldn't eat. How in that whole entire time span, when someone is stuck in a remote island, is there, first of all, how is she free enough to start touching herself on the beach? I thought she was shackled. I thought they were in chains. You know what I mean? That doesn't really make any sense. You just added that scene for extra shock value. One scene that I actually did thought that worked was that when doppelganger Liz and Daniel were together and he was getting dressed for work and then she used his club and she hit him. I thought that was funny. Keep that. But we didn't really need to see her touching herself on the beach. That makes no sense in the context here. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And especially because you already have cannibalism going on in this film, which is another aspect of shock value that I really felt didn't really add anything. But I guess you could argue that it was to show how far doppelganger Liz was willing to go for this Daniel whatever, and that her dad was, you know, the maker, which is also similar to how, like, in Poor Things, the dad was also her maker, and she was also like this Frankenstein creation, right? I see the connection, I see the parallels. But again, some things just really didn't need to happen, and him, like, just, oh god. Also, I find it interesting that in that scene she talks about like eating chocolate, but there is a moment where she's stuffing her face with something in a black and white flashback, and there's a shoe that is panned onto, but then she's also eating something like this, and it makes you wonder, is that human flesh? Is that flesh at all? You don't know what that is, and that never gets explained. And it's those little things that like are missing so many context clues that could make this movie so much more whole and so much more dense as a body of work, but it really doesn't, and it kind of leaves you with nothing at the end of the film. To be honest, when I left the film, I was just there like, what the fuck did I just watch? And I don't hate this film. I think stylistically it's beautiful, but once again, it just added nothing for me. Like I said, the third part of this film, especially with the sexual assault, just kind of turned it all wrong for me. But like I said, there's some positive moments where I did like for example, we meet Akka and Omi's kid, and Akka's kid is eating, and then Omi's like, that's enough. You can see that Omi loves power, even to control a little child's meal, right? But then at a certain point, Emma Stone's character asks Andrew, do you think that Akka's kid belongs to Omi, because he doesn't even look like Omi, and he actually looks like you, Andrew. And I thought that was such a good touch. And that's something that we could actually build upon, and build upon that hypocrisy and how comedic that could actually be, knowing that this man who's in his like thong the whole entire time while he's on this boat thinks he's the leader of this cult, and he has this woman who licks people to see if they're clean or not, is actually living a whole entire lie because his supposed son is not really his son. I thought that would have been really, really funny if they built up on it, but instead they decided to go another route, and it just didn't really land for me at all. But overall, those are my thoughts in this film. For me, this really kind of missed the mark, and I know some people will definitely love it out there. I know some people who do love it, but for me, this is not something that I would ever watch again. And yeah, but anyways, guys, that's just my opinion. And I will be back with further commentary, hopefully with Interview with the Vampire right after this video, because it's going to be a very, very long video. But stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Okay, bye.